What's up, YouTube? Oh, yes. Yeah, that's good. What's up, YouTube? Hello. So I am going to do this as part of my bullying in the NHS series, although I think it's going to cover a lot of ground. So I watched this the other evening. It's a little BBC report on It's a little BBC report on COVID and why it's killing more people of colour, as they say, which is the latest nomenclature. So I guess I'll stick with people of colour, even though I'd only just got used to saying ethnic minorities or black. I won't say BAME because that annoys me. Yeah, we'll see. So before we start the video, and I will stop and start and comment as we go because I think there's a lot to discuss. I'm going to be referring to the left and the right, terms which are pretty much redundant these days. I think if we're of a certain age, we all know what they mean. So when I say right, I mean conservative with a large C, conservative with a small c, including probably racist people and more moderate people who just believe in capitalism and keeping things as they are and maintaining the status quo. And when I say left, I mean everyone from woke idiots, SJWs, right through to someone who is probably more like me, who is a sort of left-wing, socially minded sort of person who cares about people. Okay, so that's that. This touches very much on the NHS, which is why I want to comment on it, because I've got about 20 years plus experience in the NHS, and yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and hopefully I will be able to say a few things that maybe people haven't heard before or that aren't often said on this subject. So let's dive right in, and off we go.
I think we need to understand what that word race even means. Mm-hmm. You know, race is just a visible way that humans have decided that we're going to slice and dice different groups of people, right? Mm-hmm. Race is essentially just skin color, and it was used in colonial history basically to allow people to discriminate. But the fact is that race is a biological fiction that has no basis in our genetic code. You know, if it was all about skin color, then what you'd expect is in countries where we know that populations are primarily brown or black, you'd expect their rates of COVID deaths to be through the roof, right?
I was wondering that. I mean, you look in Africa, it's not huge. You would expect to see much more impact in those communities.
Exactly. So there's something specific about what happens to people of colour in societies like the US and the United Kingdom.
Okay, let's stop there. Interesting, because I think the genetic thing is really important. Actually, something I was thinking about before making this video was, well, you could possibly argue that people of colour, maybe more people are obese, which I would say is probably statistically true to a small extent. Maybe their diet isn't so good. They might be more prone to heart disease. I think they are more prone to heart disease statistically. But actually, the genetic effect is very small. And I think what she's saying there is interesting as well, because obviously people in Africa, India, wherever, are not necessarily dying more, but people in the UK and the US are. Okay, fine. So let's restart.
That's not related to biology. which makes them more at risk of dying from COVID-19.
So what other factors might be at play here?
To be able to die from COVID-19, you have to catch it first. Now, if you're, for example, a rural farmer in Wales, you're obviously not going to be exposed to the virus that much. So you can expect that you're probably not going to get the disease. Mm-hmm. But contrast that to a health worker like me. You're in close proximity with people, and also these people probably carry the virus. So you're automatically going to be more at risk.
Right.
So in London, for example, ethnic minorities comprise about 34% of the population, and yet they form almost half of the people who are involved in health work like me, more than half of the people who are involved in food production, and almost half of people who are transport workers.
Okay, so there you go. Second point. I mean, the ward I last managed in the NHS was, I would guess, about 90% people of colour, people from the Philippines, South America, Africa, Caribbean, and a few others. So the percentage is really high. And I suppose another point is it's very high among people who work on those intense care of the elderly wards, for instance, where, obviously people are older, people die, people have lots and lots of comorbidities. So they have all sorts of different problems that make them get sick more easily, as well as their age. And I find, interestingly, that those wards, as opposed to, let's say, respiratory, cardiac, sort of specialist wards, have more people of colour, especially African, Caribbean, etc., etc. The reason for that is difficult to say, except that, is it because the opportunities are more limited? The ward managers on the more specialist wards possibly thinking that the black staff, I'll just call them that, are lazy, which I'm saying that because I've come into contact with white managers who pretty much definitely think that. So there is a bit of obvious racism for you. Also, possibly if you've moved here from Africa or wherever, I mean, let's just say Africa, for example, your English skills may not be brilliant, perfect. So some people's are, obviously. It depends whether you might speak French or you might speak English in your native country. You might speak English, but you might be from an area where English isn't spoken very widely. So there's a huge amount of difference between different areas. And I know this from working with lots and lots and lots of different people from different places. So obviously everyone from Africa is not the same. You can be African, but you could be born in Britain. You could be perfect English speaker, just like any other person who from the UK. Or you could be African, just come over from Benin, let's say, where I think they speak French, and so your English might be very poor. You might be learning English or whatever. So okay, that's enough on that. Let's move on.
Front-facing key worker roles.
Exactly. Black workers are often more at risk because you're on the front line and you're in those places where you can actually catch coronavirus in the first place.
Right. And so what about the NHS? Obviously there are key workers, a lot of key workers in that organisation.
Black and Asian people, we form 14% of the population, and yet we actually make up 21% of the NHS workforce. So a little bit more than you might expect. Mm-hmm. And yet 63% of health workers who have died from this disease are from those groups.
This is really stark, actually. It's really quite shocking when you see it like this.
So for me, as a doctor, it gets even worse. People of colour, we are 44% of all the doctors in the NHS, and yet of all the doctors who have died from coronavirus, 95% are people of colour.
95%?
95%.
Okay, wow. That's a pretty amazing statistic, isn't it? I don't know what the statistic is for nurses. I would really imagine it would be even higher. There are a large amount of people of colour in the medical profession, but I would say the amount of frontline workers in that category who are nurses is probably even higher. Okay, reasons for that. Well, let's have a look.
So the British Medical Association is taking these occupational factors very seriously and is doing a survey to find out, could there be a difference in the way that people of colour are working that means that they are more at risk of getting this disease? And it's very preliminary data, but it looks like there might be. People of colour are more likely to be in frontline roles, more exposed to the virus, whereas white people are more likely to be in management roles away from the virus.
Right.
There's also this issue of personal protective equipment. There's data to suggest that 63% of doctors who are people of colour feel like they are not empowered to be able to talk about the safety of their working conditions, compared to just 33% of white doctors.
Okay, let's stop. This is where I think my observations really kick in. So in nursing, and I'm speaking about nurses because I'm a nurse, and I know a lot less, obviously, from experience about how doctors experience their sort of management structures and things like that. But this issue of confidence, I think, is really important. And there are, I would say, definitely cultural issues at play here. Interestingly enough, the area I work in, a lot of the managers are Irish. And the reason for that is that about 30 years ago, Ireland's economy was very poor, and of course a huge amount of nurses came from Ireland to work in England because they could make more money and because there were jobs. And of course that's interesting because that dried up because Ireland's economy then strengthened in probably the early noughties, and that pretty much stopped. And of course, we're now in a situation where there's far more people from overseas working in the NHS. Now, this thing about confidence, I don't think it's just confidence with nurses anyway. It's also a bit of a cultural thing. My experience of working with Irish nurses, and obviously a lot of these Irish nurses are now the managers because, 30 years is a long time and they've moved up the ranks. My experience of the culture of, let's say Northern Ireland, the culture of, let's say, the Philippines, which there are quite a lot of similarities. Philippines is mainly Catholic. Obviously Northern Ireland isn't Catholic, but a lot of Southern Ireland is very Catholic, obviously. There, I think, is a culture of respecting your manager, doing as you're told, keeping your mouth shut. I think there's a certain harshness towards workers that you just get on, you do your job, you work your ass off, and you don't complain. So there's a whole issue, I think, about use of unions and understanding workers understanding their rights. As an English white nurse, my culture has always been very much to argue if I see unfairness and lack of respect and bullying, of course. And this is really interesting because the culture we're in the NHS is that these people who've come here from other places and maybe don't join unions, don't speak up for whatever reason. I'm sure there's lots of reasons for that, maybe cultural partly, are then of course used by managers. Managers love this because they will work a lot of hours, do as they're told, not argue. They won't go to the union. They won't send emails to human resources if things are bad. And of course this is a generalisation, but definitely looking at my experience, I would say this is the case. So, and this is the way I would talk about this. There's a feeling, I think, on the right that somehow economic migration is a bad thing. You're just coming to another country because you want money. I've never understood that. And here is the example I would give you to sort of demonstrate my thinking. Now, if I went to Saudi and worked as a nurse, I would be an economic migrant. I could earn, let's say I earn 5 times as much money working as a nurse in Saudi than I do in Britain. I might go there for a relatively short period of time. I'm going to probably do overtime, because if I'm earning 5 times as much per hour for every hour of overtime I do, then, and I know that I'm not going to be there for the rest of my life, but I'm going to go back to my own country, then obviously I'm more likely to do those extra hours. That's thousands and thousands of pounds instead of what could just be hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So this is the thing about economic migration. And there's a double standard. It's fine for people from Britain to go to Australia and emigrate and because they want a better life, but it's not right for someone from Africa to come to Britain because they want a better life. What's the difference? I'm not sure. And of course those people coming from Africa may well be coming from abject poverty to somewhere where they're earning 5-10 times as much. So my argument is that a lot of the people of colour are getting COVID because they're there all the time. They're doing all the overtime. They're working. And as regards the PPE thing and the lack of confidence, they are maybe from a culture that doesn't complain, maybe unconfident because of a whole range of reasons, which I suppose it'd probably take too long to go into. Could be their language skills aren't as good, so it's harder for them to argue things with their manager. It may be, like I said, about sending emails. Maybe they're not really computer literate. I mean, it's shocking actually, even among white British nurses, the older generation, many people do not have computers at home, do not use computers, don't even know how to use email, and that's I think more of a class thing. And that's a whole other issue, is that nurses tend to be working class in a sense. They're not from the middle class, and that's because of money. Because if you pay a small amount of money and somebody can earn more money doing an easier job, then they'll do it. If there's many people, I'm sure, that would love to be nurses, British people, but they want to do it because they know they would love the job and find it rewarding. But of course, the money isn't enough. They can earn twice as much doing something that's twice as easy, if you want me to put it that way, or less grindingly difficult and exhausting and thankless, in the sense of how you're going to be thanked by your managers, very likely. Okay, let's move on.
So they don't feel they can ask for the right equipment?
Exactly. And they're not feeling like they're going to be heard by the people who are running their service. That's
shocking. That's really shocking.
Okay, well, that was the end. Thank you for watching. I don't know how to sum all that up. I've said a lot of things, but hopefully there's a middle way through these things, and I think that's very much what we need at the moment with the polarization that is going on in the media and on Twitter and whatever. There is a middle way, and as always, the real story is far more complicated than the media sort of representation. So I think it's not... People of colour are not dying from COVID simply because the NHS managers are racist bastards, but also they are not dying... I don't know what the other side of the argument is, really. I mean, what would a right-wing person say? I suppose they'd say they're dying because their genetics are inferior, they have poor diet, they don't look after themselves. There would be all sorts of stuff on the other side, or maybe they'd say they were lazy, they don't put on their masks, stuff like that. I know that isn't a very balanced view of the two sides that I've given there, but there you go. There are more questions than answers, of course. The other thing, I suppose, is just to say that essentially the ethnic minorities, I will say, that's my preferred way of describing people. The ethnic minorities are used essentially because they won't complain as much, and they will work harder for the same amount of money, because for them that is so much more valuable compared to what they could earn back home. So there you go. Hope that was interesting. Quite stressful, this. I'm trying to marshal my thoughts, and I don't know if I've made sense. I hope I have. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.